Akhil, I wanted to start by asking you about where is the origin of your interest in poetry? Do you remember like the first poem that you ever read, the poem that made you think, oh gosh, I want to do this?
There are like two stages to this. One of the stage was something which I do not recommend, which was that in class fourth, I was about 9 years old, and one of my teachers who used to teach me the keyboard, piano, he wrote half that poem, and I wrote the other half, and we passed it as my own for the school magazine. This was a poem called Ghar, and the bits that I remember are not mine. The bits that I remember are his. It went something like घर होता है पशु पक्षियों का भी होता है माया जाल उनमें भी. Uh, but that bit of plagiarism thankfully did not last. The second stage, which I actually started taking myself seriously as a poet, is when I found a teacher who thought there was something worthwhile there. And I think many of us have that one mentor figure, have that one teacher figure who begins to take us seriously. And this was someone called Lalita Subbu, in Hindu College in Delhi University in the years that I studied there between 2003 and 2006. And she was a sort of person who everyone thought they had a very special relationship with her. And but at her memorial, I mean, she passed away a few years back, sadly. And at her memorial, we realized all of us thought that. And she made singers out of those who wanted to be singers. She made dancers out of those who wished to take that vocation. And she made writers out of some of us as well. So I think that's the stage. I remember as an undergraduate writing this abortive attempt at a magic realist novella, which only she was patient to read. And she used to take a white page and color it red and give it back to you. And that's the greatest gift you can get as a young writer. I think those are the two stages. And I think it's very, I mean, all these poets that I read, if you read Seamus Heaney writing so eloquently about the teachers that he had who recommended the writers to him as a young, when he was just a cub in writing. Those are the two moments, I think.
Okay, so
Yeah.
actually you went in reverse order because most people start with poetry and then go on to the novel or to fiction or to non-fiction. You started with a novella.
Well, calling it a novella is like almost inaccurate, but that is indeed right because that's the world I was surrounded by. I remember as a young undergraduate, I had just read The God of Small Things. The only Malayalam word I learned over there was "nale," which means tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. Uh,
Is he mistaken?
Good, good. So there's a way in which sort of fiction surrounded you, and this was also around the time where the conversation around Roy's fiction was really it had really taken over. So that was, I think, you imitate those who you like, and I think it
Another
started with.
Malayali writer you should all follow, Jeet Thayil, once wrote a column in Gentleman at that time, the magazine Gentleman, on Arundhati Roy. It was only Arundhati Roy, Arundhati Roy, Arundhati Roy over 2 pages. And that was all his comment was, because she had really taken over the sphere.
So I guess that's why sort of you gravitated towards fiction. But then I remember in the college where I studied, Hindu college, there was one scholar visiting as it happens, and she saw that on our wall magazine we had made a small post on a poet who I was fairly unfamiliar with called Aga Shahid Ali, and we were very taken in by the fact that he wrote a ghazal in English. And so we had made a small post on him, and she turned to me and she said, "Do you know who that is?" And she said, "You should read him. He studied and taught at this college." And that sort of started a journey in which I was completely immersed in the kind of poetry that he was writing. And in this, and if you read Aga Shahid Ali's work, it's sort of elegiac largely. And in the 70s, he's writing about the loss of someone who was very crucial to him at that point in his life, which was Begum Akhtar. In the 90s, he's writing about what is happening to his homeland, Kashmir, which arguably continues to happen now. And the last book in his life is dedicated entirely to the what he thought was the biggest subject matter that has occurred to him, which is the passing away of his mother. So I think just that the fact that you could notice over an arc of a lifetime that an author can unpack a single theme, that just completely captivated me, it completely arrested me, and that sort of took me to poetry.
In some ways, we are all indebted to Aga Shahid Ali. If you have not read the poem Dhaka Gauzes, it is one of the most stunning, imaginative metaphors I have ever thought of for the partition of India. It's just so beautiful and so accurate and so completely simple. Something that Akhil Katyal shares with his mentor guru, Aga Shahid Ali. The poems are extremely simple, extremely direct. but that is a hard won simplicity, a hard won directness. Because if you know one thing about studying English literature, you know that it spoils you for the writing of English literature, because you immediately become self conscious about, things like, am I using metonymy? Is this actually what is the rhythmic pattern behind this? So would you like to just read a poem?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would like to read some poems, but I have also bargained with Jerry and will make, and I have asked him that he should also read a lot of his poems for us this evening. So I'm very glad that he has said yes to that. But maybe I'll begin with a few poems, and each of them have a bit of a preface. That's the English lit teacher in me. I'll start with two or three poems and we'll take it from there. the this book has emerged from a this book, it's called The Last Time I Saw You. It's emerged from a moment of personal loss during the COVID year, and that's, I think, all we need to know for now. It has been a joy to write this book. It has been a catharsis and a challenge, a letting go, bewildering, and a letting remain, a preservation, a filtering of what was essential in a person who came into my life as quickly as he went, and perhaps far more crucially, what was inessential to that person so it could be easily, in the final sum of things, swiftly forgiven. What is this book? It is a paean to all the promises that a person and a city which made that person real held. It is aftertelling of loss, but it is a sign of how beautiful lost things are, how beautiful people become when we lose them, what frisson it was like to be proximate to him, the pleasure of it, the sting of it, the joy, still, after all these years, the sheer joy of it. The poem is called I Come Back to My Flat. I come back to my flat. In the living room, you are sitting on the landlord's sofa, tying your shoelaces. In the study, I am pulling you behind the shelves for one more kiss. In the kitchen, you're putting the 3 extra spoons of sugar in your morning tea. At the wash basin, naked, you're cleaning up the mess we've made. In the bedroom, you're sitting on my side of the bed, your back reticent. In each place, you're always there. In each place, you are readying to leave.
And clap properly, huh?
Um, a, a lot was exchanged between us. We gave each other days and days and nights and nights. But in retrospect, any giving looks so different. Sometimes it looks like a depleting of oneself. Sometimes it looks like a prospering. We are so utterly surprised by what another person can mean for us, how much another person could mean for us. In giving them a quarter of our worlds, half of our secrets, and almost all of our skin, we make them our own. And then they hold on to these secrets like a treasure, and then, like all treasure, they are lost. A painter once told me is the name of the poem. A painter once told me the hardest to draw is the hand. The most accomplished ones falter, give their sitters swollen knuckles, spidery fingers, or a wrist that looks like it would never turn. While the eyes burn with longing or a well hidden sadness, the hands refuse to believe their story. The thumb sometimes leaves the other fingers in a huff, or the phalanges are too rough, and the joints are often in places where, if they were to really be, they would always ache. She replied, I asked why this is so. She replied, displaying her own as some sort of proud specimen. How could that be perfect from which we give and take? And finally, for this bit, we thought the other person ruled over our entire city. The city changed its faces according to his moods and movements. He stopped and the city stopped. And then, in months and months, we realized the domain they hold absolutely Even more than the city outside is the inside of our homes, this built thing within four walls, our rooms and doors, our windows and balconies, which will forever be marked by their presence. They leave themselves in it like traces. My home, once he stepped in, was never the same again. No home can remain the same once your beloved crosses it. The poem is called There's Something Wrong. There's something wrong with my doorbell. Whenever it rains, it starts ringing on its own. Once at midnight, the plastic bird song filled my apartment, and I woke up to no one. The next morning, the electrician told me that water seeps into the wiring, setting off conduction. I nodded and paid for the repair. The rain was at my door, and I did not answer. Thank you.
Sorry, this poem was written at a festival in the Northeast, and it is addressed to those literary festival organizers who give poetry the lunchtime slot when everybody's hungry and nobody wants to listen. Thank you all for being here. You give us the dead time, the lunchtime slot, for poems you think are read, not bought. They do not fit into the corporate bottom line. You're right, poetry strays out of time. At the last Lit Fest to which I went, they were kinder, gave us time before lunch. But men of dignity with a political bent had so many opinions disguised as facts to crunch that it was 1 p.m. before we did start. And just as a final insult to our art, Ms. Compare announces free samosas and tea. What sonnet can compare with free? The audience abandoned us to scoff something hot, for they knew samosas would run out, poetry would not. But they were right. Poetry will not run out. Poetry will never run out. You say, I used to write poetry when I went to college. You say you've stopped reading poetry. You're too busy. Poetry will survive you. You record me on your phone. You do not seek my permission. Is this record you make why you have not bought a book of poetry in the last 10 years? No matter. Poetry will still be written. You say you do not understand poetry. No worries. Poetry understands you. For when you are drunk and down, you will stumble back to poetry for an Urdu lyric or a line or a sher. For when you are ground down by tyranny, you will seek out Akhmatova and Mandelstam. You will need Ibu Pishak Singh and Bant Singh. When you are roiling with rage, you will need Sylvia and Dylan. You will seek out Jasawala and Kolatkar. Poetry will be here. Us too. Poets too. You want a revolution? We have an anthem. You want to sleep? We have a lullaby. You want to mourn? We have a dirge. You want to pray? Here's a poem, a psalm, a shlok, a salah. We are here because you need us. And we will take this lesser lunch slot because we know how much you need poetry. And there is no poetry without the discomfort of filling a schedule with misfit poets like us.
You know, the best thing about Jerry is that he will charm you and chastise you in the same breath. And that's what I've always found. So that's why I've always gravitated towards him. Uh, Taking the cue from him, and uh, we were talking about more readerly poems and more read aloud poems. This is a slightly more read aloud poem that I'm going to read today. This book is a book about love and longing and loss. And one of the subjects which becomes a perfect vehicle for love and longing and loss is the relationship between India and its cross border nation. On a flight from Bengaluru to Delhi, while a cricket match is being played 37,000 feet below between India and Pakistan, is the title of the poem. Half an hour into the flight, the air hostess announces she has managed to dig out the score. Since a lot of you asked, Pakistan has made 59 runs for 2 wickets. Heated debates spring like cabbage clumps on each row. A bunch of dudes on the 22s make bold mid-air predictions with edgy fist bumps. A crop of nerves grow as if the AC vent has leaked into the plane, a mixture of oxygen and hypertension. What is this country? That at the mere mention of our neighbor's name, we grow new limbs of zeal? What is this wedge between them that slices even the sky? Cricket alone does not explain it. The name of that country that, like a chant, pendulums through the rose, Pakistan, in whose shadow our love for our own grows. That country is the name of a strange need, a weird force we don't explain to ourselves, a match made in heaven, a brutal necessity of another people to make one's own. Twins gone rogue, lonely clones, two countries, two matchsticks, the country we play a match with, that country we will match with, that country who's no match, that country we were hatched with. To
I absolutely love the little introductions. They are like little poems themselves. Yeah.
the, uh, the strange thing about this book was precisely that you went more and more into your own story, but as you went you also realized that there is no way that you can tell that without also telling the story of your city. And in 2020, the year that I'm mentioning, Delhi has not emerged from its shadow and will not emerge from its shadow for a long time. It was the year, as several of you will remember, of communal violence against Muslims in Northeast Delhi. It was a year of the COVID lockdown. Several of the people who raised their voices against a discriminatory law are still in prison. Uh, and hopefully that won't be for too long, but hope is almost against a kind of realism of what is transpiring around us. So there is a way in which these two stories constantly converged. And the the poem that gave the book its name, it's called The Last Time I Saw You. And it was about a morning in which the you who then would never be met again, when coming back from him, I saw the long file of people who were migrants from the city of Delhi to the different towns across north and central India, which they were going back to because the city could no longer give them even a place to inhabit. And before I knew it, it was the last time I saw him. That morning came so quickly, I had barely registered the passage of time. It happened in an ordinary room, in an ordinary neighborhood, under an ordinary sun. All my expectations of an event were folded. People leave as quickly as they enter. People leave themselves in you. People are leaves which, even when they fall in autumn, they burn the ground with their orange. We are left to pick up the rudiments. We take their leave. We grant them leave. We become to each other a final reflection. This poem gives the name to this book. It happened when the city was in a lockdown. The poem is called The Last Time I Saw You. I request your patience because it's the longest poem in the book. The last time I saw you, I woke you up to say a little goodbye. You were half asleep. I kissed you and left. I don't remember what you had murmured. It could have been, are you sure? I was leaving very early. The sun had not risen yet. I don't remember my reply. You were half naked. I kissed you and left. Imagine the first door in the world that was knocked. Imagine the feeling of someone sitting inside, surprised by a small door at last animate with arrival. If I knew this was the last time, what would I have said? How long would I have waited? What crumbs would I have left? Keeping all those possible sentences in my arms, I leave then on, to be perpetually surprised by this morning, by the simplicity of the going. I don't remember the color of that fateful sky as I climb down your steps. I decide to walk back to mine only 4 kilometers away. The morning held fast. The city was folding inwards, hardly anyone out in the neighborhood, no walkers, no car cleaners, no women rushing to keep the morning rituals of other people, only a grey stillness quietly spreading. The month of the sudden long lockdown. I walked down not knowing it was the last time, sentences still falling from my arms, each one a possibility this city could not realize. I walk. There is no catch in the promise of this morning, holding fast to a growing quiet. I leave behind all the hours we could have spent, all the corners we could have hushed into signs. I reach the ring road. As I cross into my neighborhood, I see a long, quiet file of people heading towards the river. And then, from the foot over bridge, it is visible outwards and then outwards, people leaving the city in a slow, deliberate step. I see them from afar, keep walking. I see them from afar, keep walking. The slowness is key. They know the enormity of the task at hand. At one point, I cut across their file. They have no business with those whose homes are near. They keep walking, the same slow stride of a final pledge. Each promise is broken, each hand is taken back. They keep walking. The grey asphalt is slowly shaken black. They keep walking. I reach my side of the road and for once look back. They keep walking. They are going away, suddenly unhomed, their steps making the shape of a large abandonment. Imagine the first city in the world that was deserted. Imagine the sounds that the exiles took away with them. That city will always live in the crumbs of those silences. We've been abandoned in the middle of nowhere, a man says to the camera, expecting the world, expecting nothing. Does a thing change when you see it for the last time? Does it stop answering already once it is behind your back? I am near my home. The tree is losing its sap. The city is losing its people. Each branch is being sapped. The hours we could have spent now lie indifferent in the nearness of our homes. I reach. Already behind my back, a future has stopped answering. As I climb to my floor, you are already becoming the shape that cannot be touched, a breach in the grey distance. You are already attenuating the stories that could be told now. Each one ends in the middle of nowhere. The city is becoming a thing that no one will recognize. Each step is irreversible. No crumbs to lay behind one's final going. If we abandon this city, it will starve, a man says to the camera. The city is starving of its people. They are far now, too far, already across the river. You are far now, too far, without me knowing the breadth of this morning's capacity to empty everything. I open my door and enter in a quick, unguarded step, a new abandonment.
I wish I could do what Akhil does so beautifully, which is produce these wonderful little quasi poems to introduce the poem itself. But I'm just going to read this without an introduction. It's for Palestine. It's called I Pray Because I Do Not Know What Else to Do. Don't speak until you understand the issue. I've heard this said often because I am often the person saying it. To unpick your history, Palestine, would take more time than anyone has. For when babies are being picked off by snipers, there is no more time. The sands of the desert have rushed through the hourglasses, and the countdown 10, 9, 8 is way past. Blam! Now every phone is screaming, but no one is listening. This is what makes our history the unlistening. I write this in a quiet room, Outside it is green and still. Trees by God, lawns by man. Breakfast is done. Eggs, toast, coffee, 2 cups, 6 sugars, papaya, brown bread, and a reasonable amount of butter. The wine of the bombs mocks my eggs over easy. It is easy to blame Israel, but somewhere in this country, the state deploys bulldozers to eat dreams, and human sacrifices are made to God, the subcontinental dietitian. If I blame Israel, then I stand accused for India. I want to blame now Netanyahu. I see evil in his face because it is the face of a man, and I have the eyes of an accuser. Behind Netanyahu stand Biden and Rishi and Olaf and us. We, the people. We, the complicit. The Islamophobes who cannot send bombs lend moral support instead. They are our camouflage. I want now to name villains and victims. I want to draw a circle around the good. That's you and me. I have boycotted the brands that support Israel. I have followed the right Instagram pages. I have recorded myself reading a Gaza monologue. Now I sit in judgment of you. I declare you bad because you have not done enough in this moral crisis. I am reminded now of a younger Jerry. He had no podium and no mic. He had 2 large ears that he turned into the wind. He once heard Terentius say, Homo sum, humani nil ame alienum puto. This means, I am human. Nothing human is alien to me. He heard it, but he stood up. It was a library, but he stood up. He wanted to cross time and meet Terentius in 170 BCE and or thereabouts and hug him and say, that is it. That is it. Say it again, Terry. Say it for Jerry. Say it for me. Say it for all of us. And then sit down here and tell us, how do I do this? He once heard Jesus say, love one another as I have loved you. Easy peasy, lemony squeezy, he thought. If it's people in the abstract, of course you can love them. If it's the neighbor who moves furniture at 3 in the morning, if it's the relative who grabs your property, now that's another ball game for loving. That Jerry heard. For he has created us into tribes and nations. This is from the Quran. For he has created us in tribes and nations, that we may know each other, not despise each other. Then Kabil slew Habil, and here we are. That Jerry read Vasudhaivam Kutumbakam, but he wondered about the first family of his own lineage and about all those families in the Bible, the exile of Hagar, the cheating of Isaac, the revenge of Absalom, the selling of Jacob. And you can see how carefully I'm stepping here, not mentioning those homicidal cousins who ended up on a battlefield. This Jerry here, this one knows what an ideal is. He knows why we coined the word ideal. It keeps us from being our own accusers. We say it's an ideal and we sigh in relief. We say no one can live up to an ideal. We lapse into inertia. Our hands are bloodied. We are Palestine, but we are also Israel. When we pray for Palestine, and I pray believing prayers, Roman Catholic prayers, Jewish psalms, Vedic shlokas, prayers of metta, atheist prayers, whatever I know, whatever I can think of, I pray for Israel too. I pray for the man who signs bombs. I pray for the women who pose for selfies in front of the skull of a home. I pray for me, for I am Palestine and I am Israel, and the land would remind me, you do not own me. Does the grass own me? You are grass to be mown by the sickle of time. We would listen because history has ended. The unlistening has ended. We would listen to the land. The walls would come down. The tents would rise. All of humanity would lick itself once on the arm and see blood, a ruby glowing on the skin. and see how much we are the same, and how our blood is our mother's, how our blood is mitochondria dancing to the rhythm of adenosine triphosphate. Still, I pray for peace. I pray for peace in Manipur. I pray for peace in Ukraine. I pray for peace in Myanmar. I pray for peace in the Maghreb. I pray for all the conflict zones that I do not know about. I pray that my ignorance will not be a talisman. I pray that my mind will not be stilled. I pray that my prayer will be acceptable in the ears of whoever is receiving it. I pray because I do not know what else to do. I'm sorry, Palestine. This is not very much, but it is what I have. We think that though there is 8.5 minutes left, we should close it. I think, do you agree or do you want more poems from Akhil? Loudly. Loudly, we want Akhil. There you go.
Uh, I thought after that rendition, it's only opposite and it's only right that we should close. What I can do is maybe just think about what kind of vocabulary for what kind of vocabulary does grief allow us? And you will notice that in that incredibly moving poem that Jerry just read out to us, you will constantly go through Jerry the person, but you will also that in going into that he also allows us to navigate through these many lands of injustice that he's speaking about. And usually, we tend to think of grief as self-indulgent. Usually, we tend to think of grief as solipsistic. Usually, we tend to think of grief as a place which we enter our own ivory tower, we close ourselves off. But I have noticed, at least in the writing of this small book, I've noticed that grief is what allows you a window, you know, in realizing what depletes you, in realizing what breaks you down, in realizing what breaks you into these components which you don't even recognize sometimes. It allows you a window into the lives of others, which are equally broken down at that point and far more than you, as this poem made very evident. uh, I was, and the other thing which you do with grief is also you realize that many different people have spoken about it. Not just poets, not just fiction writers, not just literary folks. I was reading about this essay, the chapter 7 in Darwin's The Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals. And there, Charles Darwin, this evolutionary biologist, this strange 19th century white man who's so sure of everything that he says, he's putting his two daughters and one son, if I remember correctly. He's asking his children to look at the sun directly. And he says, when you look at the sun directly, what gets activated in your face, on your forehead, on your cheeks are what he calls the grief muscles. And it's so strange that he's trying to look for that expression in the face of his children, using them as guinea pigs, which none of us should. But there is a way in which he's finding a physical aspect of grief, which otherwise you don't tend to reckon with. And here is this evolutionary biologist who, in otherwise, if you read The Origin of Species and if you read so much of his other literature, there is a certainty of scientific rationale behind it. And in this moment, in writing about grief, he's the most open he is. He's the most uncertain he is. He's conducting experiments which he himself is not quite sure of. And I think grief allows you that uncertainty. And if it allows us uncertainty, it might even allow us to look at the world from the mind points of view of others. And isn't that what we need more and more and more? So I think we should just end with that, because I don't want to corrode this moment by anything else than what Jerry allowed us right now. Thank you.